The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is a Georgia teenager named Sarah Grace Patrick, a young girl who spent time on social media. She also went to church. But now her mother and stepfather are dead, and she's facing murder charges. Here's the story. Sarah Patrick was just 16 when her life and her family fractured in an instant. On a quiet February morning, her 5-year-old sister wandered into a bedroom and found their parents, Kristen and James Brock, shot dead in their bed. Sarah made the 911 call. In the days that followed, she grieved publicly, posting tearful TikToks and delivering a funeral eulogy that ended with a single unsettling line: "I'm sorry." But prosecutors allege the story did not end with grief. They say a growing body of physical and digital evidence points back to Sarah herself, now charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault and set to be tried as an adult. She stands accused in a case with no clear motive, leaving a stunned community asking how this tragedy could have unfolded inside this home. It's a shocking case, right? This is, you look at who the defendant is. She was 16 at the time, looked even younger, looks younger inside of the courtroom, accused of this brutal execution-style murder of her parents while they were sleeping in bed. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. Let's talk about the defendant in this case, Sarah Patrick. What do we know and what have we heard about her lifestyle and what was going on?
Well, Vinnie, her alleged lifestyle and her behaviors are essentially laid out in a defense's motion in limine. Now, this motion pretty much is asking the judge to exclude any comments or anything that the defense sees as prejudicial or, frankly, irrelevant. Now, they don't want any talk of these things. Let's bring them here up on the screen. This is all outlined in their motion. They don't want anyone saying anything about all comments relating to the defendant, quote, texting or having sex with other guys, or any reference to the defendant's alleged sexual behavior or promiscuity. They also don't want anything said about all the videos, posts, or pictures depicting or alluding to the sexual behavior of the defendant, and also all comments relating to the defendant's illicit drug use or hiding of drugs or paraphernalia. So, Vinnie, pretty much behavior that has to do with 2 things: sex and drugs. Now, despite all this, she still has family and friends that are supporting her. So let's hear from some of those various people who are supporting her, family and friends, starting with her father, Daniel Patrick, who spoke with Newsweek. Take a listen.
I know 100% in my heart that Sarah's innocent. She's a typical 17-year-old that, lived like a teenager, and she would never do this. As a father, this has been one of the most hurtful things in my life. I'm sorry, but it's just hard,
I'm just in total shock. Because she, first of all, the length of time that's passed and the fact that they arrested her without any evidence that I know of. Everything seems circumstantial, and I think they were just desperate to arrest someone and to try, because the case was open for months. A lot of investigation. I know they tried hard to find the murder weapon. They tried hard to find who was involved. They investigated a lot of people.
As our relationship grew, she began to open up to me about her past and experiences with Kristen and James. One thing she said that has always stayed with me was, no matter what they've done, I will always forgive them and love them, because deep down, I know that's not who they truly are. The statement showed the depth of Sarah's heart.
My name is Ben Bonner, and I serve as lead pastor at Catalyst Church in Carrollton, Georgia. She has continued to attend services regularly. She and her family often travel over an hour just to be with us.
So again, Vinnie, the defense still arguing the relevance of some of her lifestyle choices, but it seems that one thing that is still constant is the support from her family and friends.
Absolutely. All right, Cody's going to be with us the whole hour as we go into some of the big issues surrounding this case. And let's get to that first question in our investigation. And it's about the defendant herself. Is there a connection between Sarah Patrick's alleged lifestyle and what happened here? Well, we've heard descriptions, sex and drugs. We've heard a description, typical teenager. Is that connected to what happened to mom and stepdad? Joining me tonight, true crime podcaster from Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Tony Bruschi is here, along with clinical psychologist Dr. Patrice Berry. Thank you both for being here. All right, Tony, I'll begin with you. And, you know, sex and drugs, I get it. Teenagers, right? Mm-hmm. It can be typical, unfortunately, right, for teenagers across the country, unless it's to an extent that's beyond whatever. Wherever she was in that part of her life, do you think that there's a connection here between this alleged lifestyle and what was happening and what happened to mom and stepdad, or is it sort of just out there?
I'm kind of in the out there camp because, you know, we say the word lifestyle. Sometimes it's insinuating one thing or another. But what we've seen here, what the track record that we know of her is very much the way a lot of teenage girls use social media, how they live their lives. She reached out to TikTok creators. She posted online after her parents were killed. And people have looked at all that, and some have thought, well, this must be sinister, but is it? Or is it just how a 17-year-old girl interacts with the world in 2025 or 26? This is a generation that doesn't call the local news. They don't write letters. They reach out to influencers. They try to get attention on platforms that they trust. And if something traumatic happens and you're a scared teenager who feels like nobody is listening, you go to TikTok. That's not unusual. That is normal for her generation. So is she guilty? Is she innocent? I don't know. Nobody does except the people who were in that house that night. But what I do know is that social media behavior isn't necessarily a substitute for actual evidence here. The prosecution has been talking about these mountains of evidence since July. I'd love to see them. But right now, what I'm seeing is a case being built on how a teenager uses the internet. And I don't think that gets you to proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Dr. Berry, in that defense motion, it seems one of the things they're getting at, and you have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, there are things that they don't want in front of this jury, right? And they say it's connected to allegations of promiscuity and drug use. And my guess is, from reading the papers, is that it may be stuff that was gathered from her cell phone or someone else's cell phone, that maybe she's exchanging pictures or talking about things, or doing things. Do you find anything outlandish about that, or something about that could potentially be connected to what happened inside that home?
I'm definitely interested to hear what comes back with the neuropsychological evaluation, especially if there's anything about impulse control, judgment, and the quality of her social relationships, because I think those things might tie into what could or might not have happened in this case. And then also her ability to manage her emotions, and if there's any history of aggression. Those would be things that would stand out to me that might point in one direction or another.
And again, Tony, you're 100% right. A lot of the evidence has not been made public in this case. They've done a very good job in this case in keeping motions kind of out of the public discussion. But let's talk about, prosecutors believe she did it, so there had to be a reason or a motive. Do you think it's plausible that if, in fact, she is living a life connected with drugs and promiscuity, and mom and or stepdad know about it? One thing we know about the family is a tight connection to their church community. Do you think that could be the focal point of some conflict in a home where you've got a teenage girl and parents?
Well, I mean, I think you have to kind of look at her pattern of behavior, and like she was just saying, the doctor was just saying, I'd be very curious too to see if she has a history of lashing out or violent behavior. From what we've understood so far, I don't believe that exists. Could there be something here? I mean, anything is possible, but I feel like it's just such a stretch at this point, not knowing anything. I feel like we're just kind of grasping at straws of what could have possibly angered this girl that then she decided to commit a double homicide, and the next week she goes to church and she's living a normal life and she's crying on TikTok. It's everything just seems to be such a reach at this point without more information.
Yeah, and it does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect too. Right? To go to double homicide with a gun inside a home. That's extreme. And by the way, the gun hasn't been recovered, so there's also the cover-up of the crime here is part of the allegation. Yeah. So Dr. Berry, how about for a 17-year-old? You've got a family that is very, they go to church. It's a big part of their lives, a big part, I guess, of their household. And you're a 17-year-old. And yeah, you go to church, but you allegedly have these other things going on. What does that do to a 17-year-old that's trying to figure out who they are if they're engaged in promiscuity? Again, allegations of this, but if it's true, promiscuity and drug use, and everyone else is talking about going to church.
And it sounds like there might have been a history before the family got involved with church, that there might have been some difficulties within the family before that. And so, according to things the family have said, it sounds like things have been better more recently, but it does seem like there was a history of issues before, and that Sarah might have been still struggling with some of the things from the past. And that's where I would be really interested to see what comes from those evaluations.
Yeah, and I we talk a lot about alleged motives. In this case, I think it's really important if prosecutors intend to convince 12 people that this young girl committed this double homicide. All right, good news. Tony and Dr. Berry staying with us. Coming up next, is there a connection between Sarah Patrick's relationships with her parents and what happened here?
People are assuming her guilt, and she's innocent until proven guilty.
The Court TV podcast will return.
I'm sort of on a campaign on Sarah's case. I think she's innocent until she's proven guilty. I think that I need to tell people what kind of person she really was. I mean, I'm her grandfather. She and I were very close. And she was a wonderful little girl.
That's Sarah Patrick's grandfather, the father of her mother, who prosecutors say she shot and killed. So prosecutors say Sarah killed her mom. Her mom's father, who's also her grandfather, doesn't believe it. Doesn't believe it. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, let's talk about relationships now, Cody. And I think this is obviously a big focal point of this investigation, this case, and the trial when it happens. What do we know about Sarah's relationships with her parents and her biological mom and dad and her stepfather?
Vinny, based on what we know so far, things were relatively normal. It was a normal relationship that a teenage girl would have with any of her parents, just like any other teenage girl around this country. Her biological parents divorced some years ago. That's Daniel Patrick and Kristen Brock, the two people in the middle of this picture we have on the screen here. She lived with her biological mother and stepfather full time. That we do know, of course. That was where the shooting occurred at their home out in Carrollton, Georgia. But again, Vinny, based on what we know, things were relatively normal. Sarah even went on TikTok, posting this photo with the caption, "Life's hard, but at least I have my mom." Looks like a crying photo in some sort of maybe depressive episode. Now, we don't know when this photo was exactly posted, but based on that, it seems as if she had a loving relationship with her mother from what we can deduce from that. But Vinnie, I spoke with her grandfather, again, the father of her now deceased mom, who prosecutors say that Sarah Grace is responsible for killing. He says that the family dynamic was also very normal from his point of view. Take a listen to this.
There was nothing, DJ, her father, he's a good person, and he and Kristen got along very well. They had their disagreements, but they had been divorced for so long that they got along quite well, and they were cooperative, and Sarah would go visit him at times. The statement was made that Sarah was sort of like a nomad, that she lived in different places. Well, that's not true. I mean, she lived with Kristen, my daughter, from as long as I can remember, as long as they owned that house, which was quite a few years. And, she would go stay with her father once in a while. But the only time I know that she moved anywhere was after this murder, and, she needed a place to live. They had their disagreements, just like any teenage daughter would have with a mother. But Sarah was a good kid. I mean, she really was.
And Vinnie, there we heard Dennis Nolan, the grandfather, say that after the murders, Sarah needed a place to live. Well, that brings us to a woman named Caitlin O'Keefe. Now, this woman, Caitlin O'Keefe, we see her there on the screen now. She was testifying at a previous bond hearing. Now, she said that Sarah moved in with her sometime after the murders, even though she only met Sarah 3 days after the murders. Now, this Caitlin O'Keefe says that she was friends with Sarah's father. But Vinnie, that still begs the question, why couldn't Sarah just go live with her biological father following this horrendous tragedy here?
Yeah, and she's a teenager. Some teenagers have a mind of their own, but that is a great question. Brings us to the next question in our investigation. Are Sarah Patrick's relationships with her parents relevant? Right? What can we learn from that? What can we glean from that? What can investigators get from that? What do prosecutors believe they've learned about that? Still with us, podcast with Tony Bruschi and clinical psychologist Dr. Patrice Berry. Dr. Berry, so looking at her situation, it's not unusual, right? This is extremely common, right? Parents split up, but the thing that really struck me was that photo where it's Sarah Patrick with biological mom and dad, but also stepdad is there, and it looks like, and another woman as well. So it looks like things were okay. Like everyone's kind of getting along. That friction that can sometimes exist didn't seem to exist here.
And I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. If they did have a cohesive blended family, we know that's what's best for kids. We will find out what's in messages. And it's also normal for teens to have some arguments, disagreements, to not like the boundaries or limits that their parents set. What would be abnormal is for it to result in a parent's death, for it to get to the place where there's violence.
Yeah, Tony Bruschi, do you think that the key for prosecutors at this trial will be to attempt to unlock what was going on in these relationships with her parents?
I think they're going to dig, and they're going to dig deep. They're going to dig back a couple years, because I think it was a complex relationship. One may look at it as one with signs of the child welfare system at play, maybe failing, maybe not, maybe parents failing, maybe not. When Sarah was 11, she told police that she felt unsafe in her mother and stepfather's home, and her father filed for emergency custody. Now, this is when she was 11, so this is a little ways back. It was alleging back then drug exposure, and stepdad James Brock was on probation at the time for meth offenses. Sarah went on the record saying that she wanted out. Again, this was when she was 11. The court granted it, and then 5 days later said, you're going to go back anyhow. So when people ask about her relationship with her parents, I think the real question is, did the system fail this kid at some point too? She asked for help at 11. They sent her back anyway. Does that mean that she committed murder? Is this where the prosecution is going to go? She was unhappy at 11. 9/11. So that somehow translates into what seemingly they were getting along, at least on the surface, on the pictures. But, we don't know what's going on behind those surfaces. I don't know. I think the question we have to ask is, does Sarah have any sort of history of violence, any pattern of aggression? Not that anyone's shown us so far. That would be, and again, an extraordinary deviation. A teenager with no violent history suddenly committing double homicide.
Yeah, that's the part that has everyone so confused here. Dr. Berry, and then there's the part after mom and stepdad are murdered inside the home, she doesn't go live with her father. And a lot of people are wondering about that. I know she's a senior in high school, and maybe you don't want to leave the school and you want to stay in town to finish out your senior year. But that seems to be a very vulnerable time where it seems you would need to have those most important to you surrounding you. And it seemed almost random people were in her life at that moment.
And that's where I would wonder, like you were mentioning, was it a geographical decision because maybe this woman lived closer? It would be odd, I think, for a child. Like you said, they may want to be with their family at that time. I also don't know how her relationship with her father was, what his parenting style was, and not to make anything bad of that, but there are sometimes where the family, they prefer for a child to be with one parent versus another. He would have had legal custody. So I think if he wanted her full time, as long as there was no DSS involvement, I think he likely could have had her. And so that's where I just wonder if that was a decision the family made that was in her best interest at the time.
Yeah, Tony, that's been a head scratcher for me as well. And I get it. I know senior year is a big deal, but you're inside a home and there was a double murder. And it just seems like for a 17-year-old or 16-year-old, that's a lot. If you're responsible, obviously it's a real lot. But even if you're not responsible, to be in the home when that happened.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we got to look at where was her support system? If we're going to look at this and wonder why was she still, or why was she staying with this person that she had just only recently met? Maybe her support system was at that school. That senior year is a big deal. And look at most seniors in high school. They're probably far closer to some of their better friends in their school system there. I mean, she was also getting support online on TikTok. I'm going to guess that might have been a factor in the decision as to where she was going to stay. I don't know, but I think it might be a much simpler
I think you might be right, Tony. I'm thinking back to my senior year. My parents were getting ready to move, and I did not permit them to move until I graduated high school. So it is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it might be a very simple.
All right. Great job tonight, Dr. Patrice Berry. Tony Bruschi, great to have you aboard. Still to come, the question that Tony was asking about, are there actually mountains of evidence?
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the teenage girl from Georgia accused of a brutal double murder. The victims, her own mom and stepdad. Her name is Sarah Grace Patrick. Here's the story. At first, Sarah Patrick appeared to be a devastated teenager, mourning an unthinkable loss. On February 20th, 2025, her 5-year-old half-sister discovered Kristen Brock and James Brock shot to death as they slept in their Carrollton, Georgia home. Sarah called 911, then took to social media, her grief playing out in emotional TikToks. But investigators say cracks soon appeared. Prosecutors alleged a trail of physical evidence, digital activity, and Sarah's own words, including a haunting eulogy and private messages to true crime influencers calling the case, quote, a really big hit, tell a far darker story. With no motive publicly revealed, Sarah now faces trial as an adult on charges of murder and aggravated assault as the case moves toward a courtroom reckoning. Every time I see her inside the courtroom, I have to remind myself of what the charges are here. This is cold-blooded murder. Think about it. It's got to be planned and plotted. Mom and stepdad are asleep. You've got your 5-year-old sister inside the house as well. You've got to plan somehow to get the weapon, go in there, squeeze the trigger not once, but at least twice, then get rid of the evidence, cover it up, and eventually call 911 later on that day. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, let's talk about arguably one of the biggest pieces of potential evidence of all this, which is the murder weapon. What do we know about the murder weapon here?
Well, Vinny, one thing is for certain. We know that it was a firearm, but the murder weapon still has not been recovered. There's no trace of it. Now, I spoke to Dennis Nolan. That is Sarah Grace's grandfather. Now, he told me that once the investigation started, police searched the house thoroughly. They searched the whole property. They even searched a well that was in the backyard that was also on the property. They searched a barn that was on the property, and they still found nothing. Now, Dennis also told me that, to his knowledge, there were no guns in the house at all. And he says even if there were a gun, he doesn't think Sarah Grace would even know how to use it. Take a listen to this.
Well, first of all, I mean, James was not allowed to own a gun. He was a convicted felon, but he was always, regretted that. But I know he didn't own a gun. The police think that he did own a gun, and I don't know why they think that, but to my knowledge, he didn't own a gun. Sarah didn't own a gun. There were no guns in the house that I knew of. So where the gun came from, I don't know. And you take a 100-pound girl and you hand her a 9mm pistol and you ask her to fire it, who doesn't have a lot of, I don't know if Sarah had ever shot a gun before. She was here, and whenever we shot guns, they were rifles. I never saw her shoot a pistol, but I just can't imagine, the accuracy that that gun had in her hands. I don't think it could happen. I think that, a 9mm has a recoil, and it's going to, it'd be hard for her as a novice to speak of, to fire as accurately as it was fired with the evidence that we know. I just don't think physically she could do it. For them to charge Sarah without, and I'll say this, the investigator told me the day they issued the warrant, when I asked him, I said, well, what proof why did you pick on Sarah? He said, well, she's the only one who could have done it. And that's a quote. But and that's, to me, that's not enough proof to throw a 17-year-old girl in jail.
So, Vinny, you heard it there. Sarah's grandfather saying that the prosecutors or investigators just wanted somebody to arrest, but prosecutors say they have plenty of evidence against Sarah Grace. Take a listen to this.
So I believe in the beginning of any case, everyone's a suspect. I think I told many of you that when we were on scene that day. However, as an investigation continues and everything ebbs and flows, like I said in my press release, mountains of evidence has gotten us through here today. Lots of processing, lots of working with our law enforcement partners to get us to where we are today that honed in on her as a suspect.
Do you believe that she tried to cover this up in any way over the course of these months? We've even seen videos on social media of somebody saying, I'm making this message on behalf of the daughter. Do you believe she tried to get people to cover up that?
Considering that she didn't just immediately tell us what happened, yes. But who knows what's going on in a young person's mind like that. But she has been arrested and charged now, and we feel confident that she is responsible for their murders. But like I said, it is an open, ongoing investigation. It's very possible others are involved as well.
What was the key break in the case?
Just evidence, being able to go through evidence, being able to use private laboratories, being able to use GBI Crime Lab. You know, when you're processing stuff, like I said, it doesn't come back in an hour. So we've been filtering through, and there's still evidence left to process.
You know that the digital evidence, I assume that's text messages, emails. Was there some type of a trail that led you that way?
There's always a lot of evidence. I won't go into exactly what it is because it is an open, ongoing investigation, but we have mountains of evidence. We don't know what goes through the mind of a child who wants to harm their parents. It is a very horrific and sad case.
And Vinnie, you know, she's right. We don't know what goes through the mind of a child who chooses to do something like that. But if they have these mountains of evidence like they say they have, I'm sure the answer is in there somewhere.
It's got to be. They need it. And, you know, again, this is a case where a lot of stuff has not been made public. We haven't had all those hearings that we have in so many of these cases. Thanks, Cody. Let's get to the next question in our investigation. Are there actually mountains of evidence here? Joining me, two criminal defense attorneys, Joanna Nieves and the host of Defense Diaries podcast, Bob Mata. Great to see you both. All right, Joanna, do you trust that authorities here in Georgia, where I am, actually have the mountains of evidence? We just haven't heard it because nothing has come up in court.
Well, I imagine that they wouldn't pursue criminal charges against her if they didn't have a reasonable basis to go after the charges and believe that they could prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm expecting that even though we haven't heard what this evidence is, we're likely going to see things along the lines of maybe a statement from the younger sister, her cell phone data, whether it's consistent with the story she may have told. Did she claim she was sleeping, but the cell phone shows that it was active? Are there text messages, Snapchats, things she thought may have been deleted? Even communications with animosity towards her parents. So we don't know yet what there is, but I would hope that they're relying on more than just circumstantial evidence to attempt to prove this case, even gunshot residue or ballistics, bullet casings, things that will actually tie this all together besides, this girl had strange TikTok videos.
Bob Mata, it took months for the arrest, so there could be no allegation by the defense that this was a rush to judgment. But what we've heard from law enforcement is that there was a lot of processing of evidence and going through evidence. Do you trust that they have mountains of this evidence?
Look, Vinnie, that's probably the favorite phrase of prosecutors, is that they have mountains of evidence. It's something that's rhetorical for them. The reality is they probably have some digital evidence, obviously texts, searches, social media activity. We know that she was there, and in their minds, that means she had opportunity. She may have made statements to other people, either via text or email or snaps, whatever the case may be. And, whatever forensic evidence they may have found in the home, short of GSR, gunshot residue, to me is meaningless because she lives in the home. And then ultimately, is there motive? They don't have to prove it, but we all want to know what it is. What would cause a child, a 17-year-old, 16 at the time, to do this to her mother? Was there trauma? Was there family conflict? Was there some kind of financial benefit? I mean, those are all questions that we don't know. But the biggest part of this, the missing part for the state, is the fact that we don't have the murder weapon. Now, the concept of a 16-year-old girl standing over the bed of her mother and stepfather and then firing the rounds into them. And I don't know if we know at this point how many times each person was shot. I don't know if it was once. I don't know if it was multiple times. But that's a really, really hard concept for me to get over. And I hope that they have more than just the strange behavior post-homicide. Because, I mean, granted, it's weird, but that's 17, 16, 15. That's our kids' reality. Like, we can't relate to it as 40 and 50-year-olds because it's not how we lived. It's, I look at my 13-year-old and their entire lives, as much as I detest it, is spent on social media, and everything that they relate to is through social media, so I hope that they do have mountains of evidence. That one thing that she said, and I'm talking about the prosecutor, that really disturbed me is the fact that she's still saying that we can't get into that child's mind. Well, I would assume if you have the evidence, mountains of evidence, that you got into her mindset some. Otherwise, they're going to have a real problem at trial.
Joanna, the other thing we know they don't have is the murder weapon. What does that tell you about what happened here?
It makes me ask a lot of questions, like how did she get rid of it? Are there external security cameras or ring cameras that show somebody coming in and out of the home, or her leaving the home to discard of something? I just feel like, a case can be proven without the murder weapon. But right now, we're just kind of speculating and grasping at straws because there hasn't been any real release of information about how this crime, how it was committed by this specific individual, but for the fact that she had the opportunity by being in the home.
All right, guests are staying with us. Coming up next, why does the defense want a neuropsychological evaluation?
I do not believe she has the integrity or accountability required to face the consequences of her actions.
This is the Court TV Podcast.
If the defendant can kill her own parents in such a violent manner, I fear for my own safety and the safety of my family and friends.
That's James Brock's sister, James Brock, the stepfather of Sarah Patrick, who was shot and killed. That was at a bond hearing. So this case, there have been some hearings, there have been bond hearings and other hearings that have taken place in getting ready for this trial, which was originally scheduled for this month. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. Cody, trial's now been delayed. Why?
Yeah, Vinny, delayed quite a few months, actually, after all this anticipation. So the delay stems from this neuropsychological report that the defense wants to use, but they still don't have the final report, right? So after seeing a preliminary report, the state wants to get its own expert to rebut the defense witnesses. So naturally, the state asked for more time. Now, the judge set a new trial date for August 2026. Now, as for the report, we don't know exactly what's in it, but the defense has said a neuropsychologist did a mental evaluation of Sarah Grace Patrick over multiple visits, and the prosecutor spoke about it in court. Take a listen.
At counter call on December the 16th, Ms. Williams and the state both indicated that the report regarding the psychological evaluation or the neuropsychological evaluation was not back yet. On December the 31st, we did receive a preliminary draft of the report from Ms. Williams, but as of right now, we still don't have the final copy of that draft. And after just reading the preliminary draft, the state does believe that we need to evaluate that to retain our own expert in that matter.
So, Vinny, again, now set for August 2026. It looks like it'll be a little bit more time before we see Sarah Grace Patrick actually in front of a jury.
All right, Cody Thomas, thanks for all your help tonight. Appreciate it. That brings us to the final question in our investigation this hour. Why does the defense want a neuropsychological evaluation? Now, all of a sudden, we're going to have a battle of the psychs in this case. Still with me, two criminal defense attorneys, Joanna Nieves and Bob Mata. Bob, what's going on here? Why? Why is the defense doing this?
Well, we know that it's not because they're trying to put forth a mental defect or the lack of capacity to form specific intent, because they would have had to have gotten written notice. So, and we haven't heard anything about that. So that doesn't exist in this case. So to me, it's going to try to go to explaining for the jury the trauma responses of this child in terms of these bizarre TikToks, you know, her seemingly callous behavior in terms of posting herself mourning, you know, all the social media activity, reaching out to content creators, you know, all of these could support a trauma narrative. And trauma responses really are counterintuitive. Some victims seek validation. Some struggle with appropriate boundaries, and others, you know, will engage in attention-seeking behavior that will look off to like older people like us. We're like, this is bizarre. So I think in terms of putting somebody on the stand that's going to explain this behavior, that sets people's mind to ease, that this isn't quite as off as it may appear, is probably the approach they're taking. I just can't see them using it for anything other than that, because of the fact that they haven't provided written notice, which is required in Georgia if you're going to come in under some kind of, lacking the capacity.
Right, like an insanity
the
type
mental
of defense.
capacity. So, I think that's what it's going to be.
Joanna, what are your thoughts about the latest step here in the defense of Sarah Patrick?
I have similar thoughts on the situation, especially because her position is that she's innocent, that some intruder committed this crime, not her. So I don't think it's going to be used as like mitigating evidence in terms of sentencing or things that we want to consider as to why she may have committed the crime and lacked the requisite intent for the crime. But more so, I think that the defense may be angling towards explaining the behaviors and even getting an expert to indicate that she's kind of psychologically typical, that maybe there aren't these flags in her brain behavior, her behavior patterns, and her mood, and just her executive functioning that would you'd ideally see in a situation where somebody is more disposed to committing intentional, planned murder.
Bob, do you think we'll learn anything else from a psychological evaluation here? And we have about 30 seconds.
Well, I hope that what we learn in terms of the jury being we is that, a kid's prefrontal cortex and their controlling impulse and their judgment just isn't fully developed until their mid-20s. I hate the fact that they're trying her as an adult. And they do it a lot in Georgia. They try kids in that state all the time. And to me, it's just not right, because they're just not fully developed mentally. So hopefully they're going to teach the jury about that quite a bit.
And Joanna, if the prosecution has their own expert, does that mean that expert gets to speak with Sarah Patrick and talk to her? We have about 20 seconds here.
I think at this point there'll be opportunities if that's something that the as long as they don't cross the bounds into what is privileged communication. But most of the time what you'll see is that there's reports that are being assessed in those evaluations.
Great to have both of you. Your insight and experience is so valuable. We really appreciate it. Joanna Nieves and Bob Mata, thank you both so much. This development in the case may be huge. It seems if the defense is examining the state of mind of Sarah, they may not believe someone else murdered her parents. This case may no longer be a whodunit, but more of a why did she do it? Now, we'll have to wait until the summer to see exactly what the psychs are talking about and what the defense says and what the jury decides. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues. There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.